Professor Pipes, has the victory of pro-European parties in the early parliamentary elections in Ukraine secured enough determination to push the country through a series of, let's call it mandatory reforms in order to attain, greater European integration, for instance, EU membership, that has been declared, repeatedly by Kiev, by President Poroshenko?
Well, the Ukraine requires a lot of reforms. The fact is that Ukraine was never really independent. It had no experience in managing politics or economics or military affairs. They have to learn that. But I don't believe that Russia would ever allow the Ukraine to get connected institutionally with the West. The government of Russia, the population at large, regards the West as an enemy, the main enemy of Russia. And they cannot allow a country that is the cradle of the Russian state to become part of the West.
So do you think that with this kind of attitude, especially of the Ukrainian people, because the political elites, one might say, that's a different story. The political will of the government of the elites is there. But are the people in Ukraine ready to go through long years of belt tightening? Because this is what it boils down to in the end run.
Well, I don't know what choice they have. I mean, unless they want to give up their independence and become a Russian satellite, that's what they have to do.
Will this determination last long enough? Negotiations with the European Union, for instance, in Poland's case, they lasted 10 years. Turkey has even a longer record, and it still has a long way to go. What about Ukraine, which seems, fairly poorly prepared for this
Well,
this
it will
kind
take
of
time,
move?
but I think what's possible is economic relations, closer economic relations, but not political or military relations. That's just not feasible.
So better business builds better relations?
Yeah, better business relations, but not political or military relations.
Is there a risk of that the new parliament and government will return to this former policy of sitting on the fence and sending out signals both to the east and to the west, looking for some kind of positive response, both in the political and also in the economic spheres?
Very hard to predict, Ukraine is although culturally it has centuries behind it, it's really a very young country without much experience in politics. So it's very difficult to predict how they will act. I don't venture to predict.
For instance, should Poland, because let's look at it from a Polish angle, continue its active policy of supporting Ukraine's aspirations, even at the expense of its own relations with Russia? Now, Warsaw's uncompromising approach has encountered a dose of opposition even within the EU itself. Warsaw claims that verbal declarations of solidarity are simply not enough. But on the other hand, business circles, they traditionally oppose any type of strong moves like tough economic sanctions, perceiving them as a two-edged sword. Now, in such a situation, what should Poland do to help Ukrainians and its government on this pro-European offensive?
I would be very careful. We in the United States, we can be much more aggressive in support of Ukraine. But Poland, as a direct neighbor of Russia, should be very careful. Russians dislike Poland altogether. They've always liked it because, in their view, Poland has betrayed Slavdom by going Catholic. Slavs should be Orthodox. And they have some dislike and contempt for Poland. And although I don't believe there are any aggressive moves in the works, because Poland is after all a member of NATO, but they can make life very unpleasant for Poland. So I would support the Ukraine morally and so on, but not in any way that would annoy the Russians.
Is there any possibility in Warsaw's case for any kind of diplomatic offensive? The Kremlin seems to be deaf to any arguments, sanctions. Well, so far they have produced some results, and the pressure is still there. It's still on. By the way, the U.S., some say, is doing more in this respect than the European Union itself. But will diplomatic moves be sufficient enough to attain any goal? With
I would
regard to
leave
the
support of the Ukraine to the United States and Western Europe and stay out of it, rather. You're in a very exposed position.
So Poland should not play a leading role. There was much talk recently when, we were sidetracked in the talks between, the major EU players, Russia and Ukraine. There were opinions in Warsaw that Poland should be one of those sides definitely present at the negotiating table.
I repeat, I think Poland should be extremely careful and leave the aggressive moves in support of Ukraine to the United States and Western Europe.
And speaking of aggressive moves, the Second World War has, as well as earlier history and numerous examples, have taught us that the winter season may be a factor that tips the scales in any conflict, practically. In your opinion, will President Putin resort to using the gas threat, or as some even say, gas weapon, this winter to solve his problems with Ukraine and perhaps pressure a teeth-clattering Europe into abandoning the Ukrainian cause?
What do you mean by threatening to suspend deliveries?
Suspending altogether, this would be the worst possible scenario, but limiting deliveries greatly, and this is a possibility.
They can't afford to suspend. I mean, most of their hard currency earnings come from the export of energy, so they can't afford it. And as for the Ukraine, they could theoretically suspend deliveries, but so much of the energy destined for Europe goes through the Ukraine that the Ukrainians could just siphon that energy off.
That was the main argument of the Russian side when it said that there is a great possibility of reducing deliveries to Europe because of the fact that the Ukrainians are siphoning gas.
Yeah, but they cannot reduce them very much because that is the source of their hard currency earnings. And now with the price of oil going down substantially,
which seems to be a continuous trend.
Yes, it may go even further. They can't afford it. That's just, I think, not to be taken very seriously.
Well, the Russian economy is heavily dependent on exports of its
so they
raw materials and
they
resources.
can't suspend it. Particularly, I don't know what a barrel of oil now is. I think something like $90, down from 110 and so on. They can't afford it.
Professor Pipes, thank you very much.
You're most welcome.